on Birds 365 before a pretty big game from an Eagle perspective coming up Sunday against the Giants, last regular season game of the year. Well, we've got our buddy Brandon Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Gation good enough to hop aboard with us and give us some Eagle Giant insights. BLG, yesterday at Eagles practice, Jalen Hurts was limited. Someone made the decision on him being limited. Probably a group more than just one individual, but that decision was made. Was it done more so out of protection or concern for Jalen Hurts' shoulder?
I think the important thing to point out is that limited is not necessarily the most descriptive term for practice participation, because by definition, and John, correct me if I'm wrong here, anything less than 100% participation is limited. So you could be at 99% in theory participating, and that's limited. And you could also be at 1% participation, and that's limited. So it's not necessarily the most helpful term in that regard. My read on it is that he is not fully necessarily ready to do maybe 100% of everything, but close to it, I would think. As there was more participation seen from him. So I think he's getting closer to that. It is a little curious. But I think what matters most here, more than anything, is that, we're seeing that he's taking the first team reps, and I don't think he would be doing that if he wasn't going to play.
Yeah, and I think the biggest sign that he was going to play, Brandon, was Wednesday, the walkthrough day, because he participated. If you remember the week before, he didn't participate in the walkthrough, and I was like, well, then he's not going to be in practice. And then he showed up in practice, and everybody got excited. And I said, whoa, slow down. He didn't take part in the ball security drills. But why Wednesday's key? Because that's install day. So, that's when they install the game plan. So the fact that he wasn't there leading up to the Saints game was a bad sign. The fact that he was there leading up to the Giants game is a very good sign. Plus, then he was in the ball security drills, which, not much when Shane Steichen's whacking you with a pad, but Jamal Singleton gets you. It could be something different. But it was a clear indication he wasn't cleared for contact last week. Now, that would indicate he's cleared for contact. Why do you think the Eagles play these games, though? I mean, the Giants don't even care about this game. The Giants are going to rest their key players. Daniel Jones probably isn't even going to start the game. I mean, Jody and I were talking about it before you came on. The preparation, in my mind, we differ a little on this, but in my mind, if you're prepared for Jalen Hurts, you're prepared for Gardner Minshew. You're not going to shift your mentality. And the ironic thing, BLG, is we asked Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen about this yesterday. How do you prepare for a team that you don't know who's going to play? Well, same way. We prepare for the starters. Why don't the Eagles recognize it? Are you frustrated by their constant subterfuge?
I do think there's been an overemphasis on competitive advantage in the past. I'm looking at this here in terms of the worst case scenario is that, he's not fully ready. I think, again, he's going to play, but maybe he's not, he's pushing it a little bit. It's not like, okay, he's 100% cleared, full go, he's ready to go. That's the worst case kind of scenario. The best case scenario is that I think that they are trying to take it cautious with him, and they might not have him again in 100% of the reps, 100% of the drills. They're just holding back a little bit just as a precaution because, given the importance of everything. So I think that could be the generous read of the situation. But that's where it might be. And, I'm guessing, I could be wrong here, that, when the final practice report comes out today on Friday, that we're going to see him upgraded to full. I'm thinking that would be happen. And I'm guess we're going to see him without a game status, but maybe not. I don't know.
I was going to say upgraded to full. Eagles give up a competitive advantage. I don't know that I would take that bet, Brandon Lee, but we shall see. Here's another, I think, pretty important question. I think I know the answer, but just give me your confirmation and or suggestion that I'm off base. Can you just plug and play Jalen Hurts as the man? We know that he is a great leader and his teammates love him and they play hard for him and the like, but being out there, he adds a comfort level to it. and it has been missing the last 2 weeks. He hasn't been there, and Gardner had to try and step into that role and didn't do a great job for my estimation. But is it just that simple at Jalen, go ahead, take back the team, or is it be it one series, one quarter, or something like that? Just from a take the reins type deal. We believe he'll play to the level he can play to, but is it just that easy, just that quick? You plug back your leader in and he takes over the team immediately.
I mean, I think it is because I think it's been lacking. I think some of the lack of specifically in the pocket management, things like that kind of translated to the team. I think, you saw AJ Brown was visibly frustrated at times during the game last week. And I don't know if that's the case. Jalen Hurts is there. Hurts is still there on the sideline, but it's a different thing. I think when, he has the cachet of literally being the starting quarterback in that game going over to, it's a hugely important factor and something I'm not just saying in hindsight, something I've been saying throughout the season when Hurts was playing before he got injured, was that the composure that he plays with, I think really, I think getting him back is a big deal in that regard.
Now the Eagles are out of it turns out it does, but it doesn't mean anything for the other team. Very similar to the Eagles last year. I think, I thought had one good game once the Saints, but
that was going to be a tough game for the Eagles. I didn't think they were going to lose, to be clear, but I did think in the Eagles' previous 2 wins over the Saints and his mobility, you look at how they beat the Saints each of those 2 times, it was with his legs, it was with the Eagles' running game, and you take Hurts out of that equation, that's kind of a big deal. So I think getting him back is huge. It's everything. It comes down to, is his shoulder obviously healthy or not? That really doesn't change for me in terms of like if the Eagles won the past 2 games or not. Like that is immaterial to ultimately his health being the most important driving factor here. If we're going to say it at a scale 1 to 10, 10 being, full on panic, I'd be at a 10 if the Eagles find a way to lose this game. But
that would mean
they win, which I think they will. I'm more at like a 4. I think it's important to contextualize things. And you look back at the 2017 season, Eagles were not playing their best football down the stretch by any means. I mean, they squeaked out a win over the Raiders on Christmas. And then because they looked so bad in that game, Doug Peterson played the starters early against the Cowboys, and they didn't look good at all there either. So, I think.
Well, let me go halfway with you, Brandon. And this is very unlikely to happen. But the Eagles lose to the Giants. Sam Howell turns into the second coming of Brock Purdy, and Washington beats Dallas. So the Eagles still have you got to worry about San Francisco as well. Who's San Francisco playing?
The Cardinals.
Yeah,
that's not
going to
much.
happen. But if they happen to
lose to the Eagles' rescue,
in other words,
I don't see it.
If the Eagles back into the number 1 seed, which is very unlikely,
sure,
but they still have the number 1 seed, where does the panic meter go from there? Does it stay at a 10? I imagine it wouldn't be 4. So where would it go there?
Yeah, I mean maybe like a 9, an 8. Because I think getting the 1 seed is just huge in and of itself. It's not worthless to be able to get that. But certainly, if you can't beat the Giants, the Eagles are 14-point favorites this week. I think that's the key. Like, it's kind of funny. There's a lot of talk like, oh, are the Giants going to rest their starters? I mean, they clearly are if they're 14-point favorites. And also, is Jalen Hurts going to play? Yes. I mean, if they're 14-point favorites, Vegas, they're not dummies. I go back to when the Jalen Hurts, even before that injury.
Yeah, they knew first.
Yeah, they knew first. So, yeah.
Which is a scandal. I'm the only one talking about that. That's an NFL scandal.
That was
really
very
is
fishy.
Because somebody gave people information and they probably bought that information and that creates but nobody cares. So I guess it isn't a problem.
All right, let me hook a couple of things in to get together here. I'll ask you a leaning loaded question, Brandon, including NFL scandal. How many points will the Eagles be favored next week at home against the Seattle Seahawks? So and by that, I mean the NFL is actually considering adding an 8th playoff team to the AFC because they canceled the game between the Bills and the Bengals. And if they add one in the AFC, they got to add one in the NFC because it's got to stay balanced and fair. And all of a sudden, the Eagles are the number 1 seed, but they got to play week 1. So the 8th seeded Seattle Seahawks come to Philadelphia. How many is this a travesty? Is it a controversy? Is it got any chance of happening? At least it's being discussed. It hasn't been implemented yet, but it has been discussed. They just kick the Seahawks ass and move on. Is that what we're talking about here?
That would be a disaster, I think, if they added that. I mean, that's insane to remove.
And I think they locked that down. They're not doing that
Right.
because when they announced the scenarios for the AFC Championship game potentially being at a neutral site, they kind of locked down the 14 playoff clubs. So they did talk about it, but I think they came to their senses, and it is going to be just the typical 7 teams on both sides. But yeah, that would have been, I was going to talk about that, Jody, and bring you on this, BLG. Even what they're doing in the AFC, it seems, I don't know. There's a lot of sports that do, circus-like things, and I always thought the NFL doesn't have to do that because of their popularity, but they do some circus-like things. Now, granted, this is a tough situation,
Right,
to figure out, but man, I assume you got that email yesterday about the NFL and the scenarios. It's like a book.
I keep having to go back to the chart that they put out, Hamlin and his health. Like, you go back to that, but at the same time, like, the magnitude of that game was huge. It was a huge game. I mean, we're talking about like Bengals potential. Like, there's a world where the Bengals win that game, then they go out and they win in Week 18, and maybe the Chiefs slip up against the Raiders or whatever, and the Bengals are the 1 seed all of a sudden, and Joe Burrow's MVP. Like, I just think that they get to get robbed of that is pretty crazy. Now they were kind of given the AFC North, which is also crazy.
I know.
The Ravens.
I know.
Sorry, like, you just don't get. And now,
Ravens got screwed.
Maybe yes and no, because maybe now they get to host a home playoff game based
on. Yeah, that's going to come down to a coin toss.
So
if it comes to a coin toss.
I know it's tough. I get that, but for me personally, speaking for myself, it's hard for me to not feel like this is kind of, like a Mickey Mouse situation, like an asterisk kind of, like, you have to put that next to it kind of season at this point, because like this threw a huge wrench in everything. And I have a hard time reconciling that this is like fair and this is normal.
It's not, but you have to have some kind of solution. And ludicrous and ridiculous. You're going to add another playoff team with 1 week to go. Not only in midstream, right before we get to the other side, let's make up new rules. Record. They have to go at winning percentage, right? When push comes to shove and the decision is made later today, it's got to be winning percentage, right? And is it 100% fair? There's no scenario with which we're all going to go, oh, that's very fair. That's no, there's going to be debate on either side. It's going to end up being best winning percentage, right?
Yeah, they've, if Buffalo, Kansas City both win or both tie, scenario 2 is Buffalo and Kansas City lose, Baltimore wins or ties. A Buffalo or Kansas City championship game would be a neutral site. And then the Ravens is BLG home field. And
you really think they're going to go to something that includes a coin toss?
That's the 3 scenarios. So they only have 3 options. They've come up with that. The competition committee, the owners are going to vote on it. So those are, one of the 3 options. Yeah, I think it's very circus-like. I don't know. The best idea I saw was, picking up Buffalo, Cincinnati on the first week of the playoffs. So the NFC wildcard would go on as scheduled. The only AFC game would be the restart of that game, and then you push the AFC back. I think that was the best case, but there's no good choices.
I think the game had to be played, and I know that sounds like harsh, but like, these teams might meet in the playoffs anyway. I think the game had to be played. I think that was, and I don't know exactly how you would figure out the right way to do it, but I think that was the answer. It had to somehow, some way, they had to find a way to get that game in. But
yeah, see, I disagree. I think although some teams are going to be shortchanged, Baltimore certainly being one of them, it's almost looked at as like an act of God. An act of God did away with that game. So sorry, 2 teams are going to play one less game, and we're going to go by winning percentage. We're going to proceed with the way we always play the playoffs. And if that one half game that doesn't get played affects it, Sorry. That's all you can do is say sorry. But that's that I think is the best solution and scenario. If they don't go there, yes, I will second guess the National Football League. All right. Will we second guess the Eagles playing Jalen Hurts on Sunday? What's the chance that Jalen Hurts can't, in his own mind, be it preparation and or just natural instinct, not pull the ball back in from Miles Sanders' stomach and decide to take off on a running play and end up being pounded on his shoulder?
I mean, yeah, that's in the DNA of Jalen Hurts, which I think I could be wrong. I would think is a huge point. Point of emphasis from the coaching staff is like, and maybe to the point where you have to like threaten Jalen Hurts, like, hey, if you do not comply, we're pulling you. Gardner's in the game. Like, you have to, win this way. You have to play this way. If I'm the Eagles, my approach in this game is fairly simple. It's that, let's make the Giants not play their starters in this, or pull the starters in this game. Let's go out, start strong. Let's build up a lead. And then we're pulling you out of there. We're getting you out of there in the first half. Obviously, that could be easier said than done. But I think that's how they're going to be looking at it, is that they want to come in, start strong, take advantage of the Giants not playing some of these key players, and then get their starters out of there as soon as they can.
You mentioned those instincts, Brandon. Is it as simple? The Eagles went through this last year with the ankle injury with Jalen Hurts. He missed the game against the Jets, came back, and I think it was either the game after or the second game after. He ran it like 2 times. So they shifted their thought process. They changed the offense. They took the zone read off the table. Mm-hmm. Is it as simple as taking that off the table? However, while I say that, Miles Sanders is also banged up. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody's talking about that. The guy's playing with a knee brace. That's one of the reasons when people said he didn't get as many touches as he should have. And why is Kenny Gainwell, Boston Scott out there a little bit more? Well, Kenny's going to be out there third downs and all that. But some of it had to do, they wanted to limit Miles's touches. So you got kind of both ends of the spectrum. You can't just hand it off to Miles because he's dealing with something.
Yeah, Sanders played his lowest snap count percentage of the season, and that included games where the Eagles pulled their starters. Yeah. That's definitely something. And he's still limited on the injury report this week, Miles Sanders. So certainly, I'm expecting that there's going to be a restriction again this week. Ultimately, it's a point where, again, if the Giants are not really going all out to win, and they shouldn't be. And, I'm not just saying that as someone who thinks that's, the best thing for the Eagles. I'm saying that as I think as a rational, objective analysis that
Joe Judge would play this game. BLG. He would,
but like when you have Saquon,
he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't.
I don't know. Maybe he would, but if anyone, but Saquon Barkley has the second most touches in the NFL this season. This talks that the Giants want to extend this guy. You're really looking to get him more work in a Week 18 game. That doesn't mean it. Like, that just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So, I'm thinking whatever the setup is, the Eagles should be able to have enough to find a way. Just find a way to get it done.
All right, I'm going to one of my favorites, BLG, the hypothetical. And it's one that the Eagle fans will not like a little bit. Let's say mid-first quarter, Jalen Hurts back to pass. Jack Driscoll just gets okey-doked. And the Giants defensive end comes over and just lays Jalen Hurts out. And he gets up clutching his shoulder.
Oh, no.
I'm not even asking about Jalen Hurts. Jalen's Jalen. I'm asking about Jack Driscoll. If he gets beat bad, and, oh, by the way, on a scale of A to F, I'd give him a D- with his performance last week against the Saints. He just wasn't very good. Do they change their strategy on the offensive line? Do they go, Jack, you go sit next to Jalen in the tent. We're going to get Dillard out there. We're moving Mailata over to the other side. We have to prep just in case Lane sprains his ab going to the bathroom this upcoming week before the playoffs. Will the Eagles be in an evaluative mode of their right tackle, Jack Driscoll, in this game, even believing that Lane Johnson will be back for the playoffs?
I don't think so. I think Driscoll is actually a little bit better than you give him credit for there, Jody. I think the bigger issue to me,
You thought he was good against the Saints?
I'm not going to say good, but I don't think he was.
I know he was terrible.
I don't think he was a disaster. I think, especially in pass, I think he was better in pass pro than he was as a run blocker in that game. And I think that, I think Gardner Minshew really made the offensive line look a lot worse. They really didn't do them a lot of favors. Now, to be clear, the offensive line had way too many pre-snap penalties, and Jason Kelce had that uncharacteristic illegal blocking downfield penalty. So I'm not going to give him a pass for that. Like, that's on that offensive line for sure. But when it came to pass protection, I just thought Minshew looked rattled from the jump. Pockets management was really bad. Not to say the offensive line, played an A+ game by any means, but I really think Minshew made the offensive line look a lot worse than they could have been, a lot worse than it would have been certainly with Jalen Hurts in there. So, I think, Driscoll's a little bit closer to being average than terrible.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Gardner did play. I mean, that was I broke one of my rules, Brandon. I said, I think, it's a cliche, but it's true. Quarterbacks get too much credit when you win, too much blame when you lose. Not in this case. I mean, this was a Gardner loss. He was just terrible. Jack Driscoll had some issues with Cam Jordan, but Cam Jordan's a good player.
Right.
A very good player. Now, to Jody's point, the Giants have some, for the first time in a long time, the Giants have some at least talented edge players. Now, I don't think Ojulari's even they're going to touch the field. Yeah. But I don't know. But, the concerning thing with me, with Lane Johnson, is we all know he's going to try to play. Can he finish? Can he finish in the playoffs? And here's my bigger concern. The fact that they know that Lane's going to try to play, I think, is the reason they haven't done the shuffle. But the shuffle, I mean, is put Jordan on the right side and put Andre Dillard in at left tackle. I think that's their best five without Lane Johnson. But they weren't going to do it because you don't want to mess with Jordan Mailata if you don't have to. You don't want to mess with him for 2 weeks. Is that sort of a catch-22? Because I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, it's a tough evaluation. I generally, I think, subscribe to you want to change as few. I know people talk about best five, but that's also best five in a vacuum. It's not necessarily, because you have to consider. I think Mailata is significantly, not going to say like bad, but Jordan Mailata at right tackle is not the same thing as Jordan Mailata at left tackle. I don't think that's the same exact player. I think you're getting a downgraded version of Jordan Mailata at that stage. And I think there's value in keeping as many offensive line spots the same for continuity as you can. So going for that 1-for-1, I think is generally the good strategy. And again, I don't think Driscoll, it's tough. He's in a tough spot because when you're going in for Lane Johnson, even if you play decent, you're going to look a lot worse because it's Lane Johnson. He's one of the best tackles in the NFL. So it's a big drop off, even if it's to a good player or a decent player. So I think that doesn't really do Jack Driscoll any favors just by comparison. But yeah, I think they're going to go with this format. I mean, whenever you ask Nick Sirianni about Jack Driscoll, I think he has nothing but good. And that's not like he's going to throw him under the bus, but it seems like the read is that they believe in him.
He loves Jack legitimately. He loves him as a player.
All right, BLG, another kind of hypothetical question. Let's back it up 2 weeks ago before the Dallas game. We know what the Eagles needed to do to procure home field advantage throughout the playoffs. We also know it didn't happen. But if at that time, with win one game out of your last three, the pressure on the Philadelphia Eagles was X. Mm-hmm. It is now X plus because they've lost 2 games and we're down to a final case scenario, got to beat the Giants or hope someone else falls flat on their face for you. Whatever that plus is, it's added pressure. Is that more of a bad thing or a good thing in preparation for the playoffs?
I mean, it's a bad thing that they needed to get to this point. They shouldn't have had 2 chances to get to a Week 18 game where it didn't mean anything for you. And, you could have trotted Jalen Hurts out there for maybe a drive or 2. You could have treated it like a preseason game. You could have been playing Janarius Robinson and Ian Book and Trey Sermon. You could have gotten them some reps in this game. and just kind of cruised a little bit to end the season. So it's already a failure to some extent that you did not lock up the number 1 seed by now. I thought you should have really didn't have to win both the Cowboys game and the Saints game, but you really had to win one of them. I mean, you entered the Saints game as, again, like 6.5 point favorites at home. You should be able to find a way to win, even if it wasn't pretty. You got to find a way to win that one. You just scored 10 points. That's not good enough. It already is some kind of, failure that they're here. But again, I think it resets. That's maybe it's a cliche that people want to talk about. Once the postseason starts, it's a whole new ball game. But it really is. I mean, we saw that again with the Eagles in 2017 when they made the playoffs. Things were not looking good at the end of the season.
Yeah.
You get into the playoffs. Things are a little testy against the Falcons, of course. But after that, they really found their groove. And, after the championship game, it was pretty clear that, this team is like going to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So, things can change quick.
There's a butterfly effect to everything, Brandon, and the fact that, the Eagles playing that poorly at the start of making the change back in 2017. That's when Doug Peterson said, all right, let's scrap this. Let's build around what Nick is comfortable. Told John DeFilippo, Frank Reich to essentially rebuild the offense, which you don't see. And all of a sudden the Eagles go on this historic run. So it's, things can happen in weird ways at certain times, but you're right. It's a failure. I wanted to be watching Trey Sermon at 1:00 on Sunday. So it screwed me. It screwed you. We wanted to get out of there in week 18. However, they have to win this game. Last one from me, since we haven't talked much about the defense, and follow Brandon at Brandon Gowton on Twitter, bleedinggreennation.com, editor-in-chief. You had the Eagles breaking the all-time sack record back in the preseason, didn't you? That was the most obvious prediction possible. But because you have a lot of fan interaction at Bleeding Green. People still can't stand Jonathan Gannon. They're going to break the NFL sack record. They have the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL. Granted, not the advanced, but nonetheless. What more could you possibly want?
I think it is frustrating. I'm certainly not someone who is saying Jonathan Gannon should be fired, because that's, you're not giving the defense and him enough credit at that point. Now, with that said, I think there is a fair question to be asked. To what extent does Jonathan Gannon maximize the talent he's been given? I think when we talk about the defense's improvement from last year to this year, I don't think if we're like dividing up, percentages of who is to credit. I mean, I think Howie Roseman deserves a big chunk of that. And that's coming from me, a guy who's been very critical of Howie Roseman in the past. I think the talent that the Eagles have on this defense, which is, I don't even know off the top of my head, but it's multiple Pro Bowlers and multiple Pro Bowl alternates. I think the talent is a big factor here. And now, okay, you can say, well, Jonathan Gannon is helping to maximize the talent. And there's some truth in that for sure. But it's just, I get, you can understand the frustration from a standpoint of knowing and feeling are two different things. And when you look at a lot of these metrics and the results that the defense is good, but the feeling of watching Andy Dalton and Taysom Hill go 15 of 15 in the first half is not a good feeling. So those two things, I think there's, you have to reconcile that. And I think that's where some of the frustration comes from.
All right. We had Pat Leonard on yesterday, who covers the Giants for the New York Daily News. And he basically came out and said it. The Giants don't like the Eagles. The Giants don't like the fact that they got their ass kicked by the Eagles just 3 weeks ago. They always get their
ass kicked by the Eagles.
Yeah, right. There's more to it. History's history, most recent history, long-term history. The history that matters the most is 3 weeks ago, 48-22, okay? So there are some guys who will be playing in the game because, as John correctly points out, you can't sit everybody. There are no COVID exceptions. Everybody wants to compare to what the Eagles did in week 18 last year. Hopefully that never happens again. The Eagles used a loophole to take advantage like no other team ever had before.
12 players.
And might not be able to do again in the future. So there are going to be Giants out there that were part of getting their rear ends handed to them by the Eagles 2 weeks ago. We like to think the Giants don't care about the outcome of this game because they got a eye on the future and playoffs. But do you think human nature sneaks in here? That the Giants players who did get abused, who, oh, by the way, since that game, Giants have been good. They played their way into the playoffs. The Eagles have gone backwards, mostly because of Jalen Hurts' injury, but they've gone backwards. Do you think maybe some Giant players are going to be a little bit more motivated than everybody thinks come Sunday?
Well, yeah, I don't think effort's going to be an issue for the Giants. They've been pretty good about that all year. I mean, let me take this back to the process Sixers for a little bit. And, they were a terrible team all the way back in the day, but they lost a lot, but they played teams tough a lot of the time, or at least proportions of the game, because they had guys on young deals who were unproven, who really wanted to, prove themselves in the NBA. And I think, they're going to get some similar things here with the Giants who, you're going to have guys who might not be normally getting playing time who are going to want to prove they deserve more playing time. If not for the Giants, another team. So I expect the effort to certainly be there. I think it, at the end of the day, just comes down to a talent issue, and, effort might not be enough when the talent kind of just outdoes them. And obviously I think the Eagles should be at least playing with a lot of effort as well. Given
people forget. Yeah. I always say, BLG players don't tank, organizations tank.
Exactly.
And you saw at the beginning of the process, the Sixers were a little bit too good. People forget at the beginning. And then Sam had to trade off some more players because they were winning a few too many games. So players try, man. And especially players who don't get to play. I mean, they want to ball out more than anybody else. So yeah, I agree with you. Effort will not be the problem. Talent will be the problem for the Giants on Sunday.
BLG, it's always fun when you jump in with us. We appreciate your insight. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Thanks for jumping in. We'll have you on during the playoffs too, bud.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
That is Brandon Lee Gowton of Bleeding Green Nation here with us on Birds 365. All right, there's a reason why I asked that question. You brought it up earlier. I think you called it controversial. That Vegas at times, and when I say Vegas, I hope everyone knows I'm referring to all potential wagering sites for putting money down on the outcome of a National Football League game. It's not just Vegas. I pick up my phone. It's right here. You can get your action in rather easily anywhere you happen to be sitting. I don't know about 14 points, John, this week. I'm going to get a pick out of you
number.
here.
That is a big, big, big number. I would not. But first of all, I got to tell you, I'm not the betting expert. You are far more betting expert than me. But Week 18 is a week in the NFL that if I were a bettor, I would steer clear of. Because there are so many teams that are tanking. So many teams that don't want to win, so many teams that decide, the draft pick. And this has changed a lot in recent years. And Sam Hinkie, we're bringing up Sam too much. Big part of that throughout entire sports. Yeah, I talk about it all the time with the Eagles. The Eagles were so good, and people are talking about the future. I'm like, I say it all the time. They broke Philadelphia in a little bit from a future standpoint. But when you're a bad team, and as a Jets fan, during the Trevor Lawrence year, the Jets, I forget who they beat late in the season, and they shifted away. They lost the first.
Oh yeah, they could have
number one overall pick.
With 2 weeks ago, they had the number one overall pick.
Yeah, and they won a game, and it, look at how that worked out. And Trevor's starting to turn into what we all thought Trevor was going to be. And the Jets are struggling along with Zach Wilson. They have a very difficult decision there. Not difficult
not for me,
for you, Jody, but difficult for them. Yeah, I mean, I would stay away from Week 18. That's a big number, and I think the Eagles are going to beat that number, but I wouldn't bet on it.
So you do think they're going to beat that number? You think it'll be when push comes to shove? And yeah, we do this here every week on Birds 365. We break it down into tiny minutia. And then there's a final score, and you can just evaluate the final score, but you got to get through it and how'd you get there and how'd they play and everything else. I'm only asking you. I'm not asking you to give me a book-filled preview of the game like the NFL did with playoff scenarios for you guys yesterday. No, ridiculous. All I need out of you is a final score, McMullen. Give it to me. Eagles, Giants. How's it going to end?
I had a 31-16 game, so just barely. And I wasn't even thinking about the spread. Yeah, I think they're going to win relatively easily. But, yeah, I would steer clear of Week 18 in the NFL just as a policy. a blanket policy. Too many hinky things going on. Hinky used in a different term.
Yes, I got you. Yeah, no, see, I think it's going to be closer than that. The Giants, despite the fact that they're probably going to sit Daniel Jones, they got a pretty good backup in Tyrod Taylor, a legitimate borderline starting quarterback in the league that not everybody has. And the Giants are moving on. They're going to play in the playoffs. Unlike the Eagles last year, who were doing the same thing, who brought up their JV to play the game like no one else ever has in the history of the National Football League and may never do again. So if you want to use that as your balancing act to say, oh, well, the Eagles went in the tank, even though they had a playoff game coming. No. This is unlike that, what the Giants are going to do. The Giants have been playing well. There's no Lane Johnson this week for the Eagles. We don't know about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. If I'm a betting man, I'm betting against him playing this week. And we got no idea what Jalen's coming back at. If Jalen's coming back, there's a possibility you may get Gardner Minshew week 3.
You're right. And one thing I haven't brought up is and you can ask Barrett about that. And I want to request to ask Barrett, Jody, about Jack Driscoll and the best spot.
Oh, I'll ask him,
but does the fact that it's pretty clear, Pat Leonard, our buddy, but everybody else in New York as well has, Giants are going to rest a bunch of players. It's clear. Does that change the Eagles' thinking at all? Did they?
No, you just told me they prep for the starters. That's what the coordinators told you yesterday. They're prepping for the starters.
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about with the health of Jalen Hurts. In other words, and this is not me saying it. In other words, did they say, they're not going to play anybody. We can give Jalen more rest. I'm not talking about game prep. I'm talking about health-wise. Can we afford to give him? Because remember, when this all started, I was a firm belief that you were not going to see Jalen Hurts until the divisional round of the playoffs, because I thought the Eagles would clinch. And I know I got to get out of here. I thought they would clinch and you would have that flexibility to give them the extra rest. Well, they're out of mulligans.
Yes.
But does the Giants saying we're going to waive the white? What does that have them rethinking? That one over.
Here would be my answer to your question. Did they not have that thought process working against the Saints last week?
No, because I don't think he was ready last week. I think it's much more. I think it's much closer. And again, I give you the fact he wasn't an install. The fact that he didn't do the ball security drills tells me he wasn't cleared for contact. I don't think he was ready last week, so I don't think it was about that. This week, I think it's legitimate. He's not 100%, but I think it's legitimate. He'll get cleared by the doctors. But
right?
If the Giants were playing,
I'm cutting to the quick here. The reason why they would do that this week is, well, we can win the game without Jalen, so we're not putting her in. Yeah. Exactly. Did they not believe they could win the game without Jalen last week?
They did. Yes,
then that's why I would be very tentative in going down that road again of, we might not even need you. Oh, yeah, you need Jalen. If Jalen can play, if Jalen's ready to go, get him in there, get a 14-0 lead, then get his rear end off the field. But don't go we could probably get by without him.
Well, the only
by the
way, this is devil's advocate thing. I don't think this is going to happen. I'm just throwing it out there. The difference is the Saints are playing their starters. The Giants aren't. So, the Saints have flaws, but they were playing their starters, trying to win the game, playing really good. They got Marshawn Lattimore back, who won the game. Very good player. Giants are playing backups or going to play the majority of backups. So that's the only reason.
Here's the key question for John McMullen. Who's a better quarterback, Andy Dalton or Tyrod Taylor?
I'm not an Andy Dalton fan, but Andy Dalton is a better quarterback
than Tyrod Taylor. Okay, just checking because I know you're not an Andy Dalton fan.
No.
Either way, we shall see this week. All right, J-Mac, have a good time over there at the NovaCare Complex. I will talk to you on Monday, and man, it could be somber if the Eagles don't win this
nothing
game.
To worry about.
Johnny Sunshine, is that you?
No. Well, I'd love to talk about a loss. I'll rip them to high heaven, but I don't expect to be talking about a
I
loss.
thought Johnny Sunshine was our buddy Clark, not
Yeah,
McMullen.
Clark.
No
Clark is,
worries with the Eagles. You heard him say that, Eagle fan. For those of
yeah.
you who think McMullen is too negative, Johnny Sunshine. He's basically
Well,
locking
it's
up a
funny.
victory.
I'm too negative to half the fan base, and I'm an Eagles apologist to the other half. You can't win, Jody.
Exactly. John McMullen here with me. He'll be back on Monday. All right. Coming back next, we've got the Big B. Double B. Barrett Brooks going to step in for Johnny Mac and take us through the second hour here on Birds 365.